When it comes to making fan theories, there are plenty that stick out. Jar Jar Binks was a Sith Lord. Ash has been in a coma all along. Sometimes these fan theories can even come true. Now, what if I told you that I had a crazy fan theory regarding Black Clover? And that is that Yuno never existed, and he's been Asta's imaginary friend all along. There's a lot of evidence to go over, so let's get right into it. In order for me to discuss the idea of Yuno never existing, at least not physically, but as Asta's imaginary friend, I must first go over the many different things that are pretty sus that happen in either episode 1 of Black Clover or chapter 1. Because the anime actually adds canon scenes to the first few episodes that either are not present in the manga or they're just far more fleshed out in the anime. In the opening scene of Black Clover, when Father Orsi finds Asta and Yuno at the church, it's phrased in a very interesting way. Another baby. Baby as in not babies, it's not plural. Now this could be merely chopped up to the slip of the tongue, or the fact that this is just anime-only material, and they messed up. But that's just not likely, especially when we delve deeper into the theory with the other evidence. When Father Orsi takes them inside, he actually begins to notice that Yuno is there, but even then, there's hardly an interaction. We actually see a lot more interaction with Asta and Father Orsi. Asta actually kicks Father Orsi to the ground and sends him flying. Asta's actually acting like a baby here. Yuno is basically calm and doing nothing. So it kind of shows that, yeah, Yuno didn't really exist until Asta actually created him with his imagination. Let me get into one of the most important pieces of this theory, and this is an author statement by Yuki Tabata himself. I see a lot of myself in Asta. In a sense, him and I are one and the same. But I also took inspiration from one of my favorite characters in all of manga, Tsukishima, the Fullbringer from Bleach. I thought his story and powers were very interesting, and so I decided to use a lot of what I learned from Kubo-sensei's portrayal of him for creating Asta. Now this is rather interesting. There are actually a lot of similarities when you look at it. Tsukishima is essentially powerless. He doesn't have innate power like the Shinigami or Hollows in Bleach. Instead, Fullbringers have to take out the spirit energy from the objects around them to manifest power. This is very similar to Asta as well. He takes the life energy of those around him to have extrasensory abilities, as well as uses the key technique known as Zetten. But we also know that Asta has to directly take anti-magic from objects like his 5-leaf Clover Grimoire or his swords. Which, speaking of, Asta has a sword as well as Tsukishima. But do you guys remember that Tsukishima's ability is called Book of the End, and it allows him to essentially insert himself into people's past, making them believe that they knew him all along? Well, this was the really weird but also interesting plot twist that developed within the Fullbring arc. But this is really interesting because when Asta first gets the grimoire, it's stated to be a 5th-leaf Clover grimoire that possesses anti-magic. And when Asta gets his book checked out before the Magic Knight's entrance exam, the advisor is really confused about Asta's grimoire and says, the book that will end all magic. The Book of the End versus the book that will end all magic. Tabata is oh so sneaky. But this begs a question, right? If Tsukishima is the basis for Asta's creation, as well as Tabata using his own life to create Asta's character, where is Asta's ability that relates to Tsukishima? I mean, if I was able to use the fact that Tabata was a Bleach fan, taking inspiration from Bleach for Black Clover, to end up predicting the massive Julius plot twist, then I think I can use this to predict something even crazier. That Asta secretly does have a magic power, something similar to Tsukishima, but also, he used that magic power to create the falsehood that is Yuno Grinberry All. Before I delve into how and why Asta has this crazy power, let's first get into other pieces of evidence that Yuno was actually a creation of Asta's Book of the End ability. When Asta and Yuno are confronted by the rogue chain mage Revchi, Yuno gives words of encouragement to Asta. In response, Revchi is visibly confused. He says, "Wait, who's there?" As if because of Asta's mental state from initially losing to Revchi, his weird Book of the End magic power flickers, and it dispels the illusion that is Yuno, which sends Revchi into a temporary state of disillusion until the words finally reach Asta. Snapping him out of it and making him surpass his limits, he then receives his Book of the End, solidifying Yuno's existence, the 5-leaf Clover grimoire, as to which he's finally able to make physical manifestations as well, with his weird pseudo-imagination magic, and he creates the very concept of the anti-magic sword and anti-magic as well, eventually leading to Revchi's defeat and jump-starting of the story of Black Clover. There's another statement that is pretty sus that adds credence to Yuno being an imaginary friend created by Asta's imagination magic. That is Yuno's entire backstory. None of this existed prior to Asta's creation of him. Do you know why this is the case? Because both the narrator of the Black Clover anime and the Black Clover databook states that Yuno was born a peasant. This is actually supposedly a major contradiction because we actually see that Yuno was not born a peasant, but a royal back in the Spade Kingdom. but that's because it's only backstory that Asta had to fill in with his Book of the End Imagination Magic. The narrator and the data book are stating that Yuno was born an orphan because he was born an orphan. He was created by Asta's imagination magic, and once Yuno's existence in the world took hold as a full incarnation, his backstory was created by the subconscious of Asta's imagination. Kind of similar to the Book of the End Powers, where, yeah, Yuno wasn't real at first, but once he was solidified, it gave him a real backstory that the narrator nor the Black Clover data book knew about because it didn't exist until Asta created it. Now, this theory can take a turn real quick, that there might be a lot of people that Asta has accidentally created with his imagination magic. His imagination magic has altered the life of the people around them. See, we know that from a very, very young age, Asta was told fairy tales by Sister Lily. One of these fairy tales revolves around the first Wizard King, Prince Lumiere Silvermillion Clover, who Tabata actually based off of a fairy tale called The Happy Prince, which revolves around a prince who gets turned into a living statue and has a bird companion. There are so many other fairy tales referenced in Black Clover, and almost all of them interject with Asta's narrative. Noelle is the fairy tale of the ugly duckling personified, being mistreated by the rest of her flock until she evolves into a beautiful swan. She finally gains acceptance. Nacht has 4 devils: Guillermo, a dog devil, Plumade, a cat devil, Wagner, the donkey devil, and Slotos, the rooster devil. This matches with the fairy tale known as the Town Musicians of Bremen, which follow 4 animal musicians that are a dog, a donkey, a cat, and a rooster. Yami is the heroic prince in shining armor in both Vanessa and Charlotte's fairy tale. Charlotte was going to be cursed to be trapped in a cage of time if she didn't fall in love. But she fell in love with Yami, and that broke the curse, at least partially. The original title of Sleeping Beauty was called Little Briar Rose, so it's obvious that that's Charlotte's fairy tale. Vanessa is Rapunzel, locked in a high tower with only a window to experience the outside world, until a handsome prince breaks her out. Grey is Cinderella, mistreated by her stepsisters and stepmother, and forced to get very dirty because she has to do all the cleaning. Charmy is Little Red Riding Hood, as she was a wolf in sheep's clothing all along. There are even more fairy tale motifs that appear in Black Clover. What if this isn't only because of Tabata's love for fairy tales and that's why they exist in Black Clover, but it's the actual manifestation of Asta's imagination magic because of all the fairy tales that Sister Lily read to him when he was little? Okay, now that I've gone over a lot of these weird little things that happen in Black Clover, let's talk about how Asta's magic power came to be and why. How does imagination magic come to existence in the first place, and how does this mesh with his supposed anti-magic ability? It actually can be answered by pairing one of my most notorious fan theories and also answering another question that dominates the fandom. Is Asta only human, and who is his father? I think it's important to start with Asta's father and why that sets the basis for his magic powers. Asta's father is Adramelech. It starts with Adramelech's looks. Pair him with Asita, and I can totally see him being Asta's father. They just look like a family. Also, remember Asta has imagination magic, right? Well, this adds up perfectly. Remember that Adramelech is a devil that resides on the Cliff-Off tree. He's the second gate or the third devil. What we know in the demonology is that it's based upon the Sephiroth. It's supposed to mirror the Cliff-Off, or it's better to say that the Cliff-Off is supposed to be the shadow of the Sephiroth in the Tree of Life. This would mean that the devil should have a shadow or a dark, twisted versions of the Sephiroth. Adramelech is the shadow of Reeve, who is the elf that took over Dorothy's body, and she has dream magic. A shadow version of dream magic would be nightmare magic, which means that it's likely that Adramelech has nightmare magic. That actually works perfectly for Asta, as remember, magic attributes are tied to genetics, which means that his attribute should be related to his parents' attributes. Nightmares, and really any form of dreams, are tied heavily to the imagination. In fact, studies have shown that some of the most imaginative authors or artists of all time also had some of the most surreal dreams or nightmares. So it would work out that he took the aspects of nightmare magic from Adramelech and uses imagination magic. Now, I know the devil hybrid Asta theory is one of my most controversial, but oddly enough, it is also my most supported theory. It was far more supported than the Julius theory, so if you think about it like that, yeah guys, it's happening. Asta's a devil hybrid. But here's the evidence for it. Asta, while in Devil Union, has 4 horns. In True Devil Union, he has 5. We've seen that Devil Host have the horns of their devils when using their power. When the Dark Triad use the devil power of their devils, they have all 4 of their horns. Nacht has 2 horns in Union, but he also has 4 when he fuses with 2 of his devils. They both have 2 horns each. Meanwhile, Liba, Asta's anti-magic devil, only has 2 horns. So these horns must be accounted for. These would be accounted for if Asta was a devil hybrid. But also, Asta being a devil hybrid answers 2 more questions. How did Asta's father survive intercourse with his mother, who steals the life of those around her and can kill things like magical snakes instantly? And also, how did Asta survive his mother's lifesteal? He should be dead. Well, we actually know that devils and Black Clover are resistant to lifesteal. This is postulated by Lashita when she meets Liba, and supported by that when Lucifero arrived later, and he only stated that she was stealing his mana, not his life energy. And we've already been shown that Asta himself is resistant to lifesteal, as Zagrid's life-stealing spell could not work on Asta, even when he wasn't even surrounded by anti-magic yet. So Adrammelech being Asta's father answers the many questions of the theory. Why does Asta have imagination magic? How Asta and his father survived long enough in Lashita's presence? Now, as I mentioned earlier, I believe that the anti-magic powers and Grimoire are merely a manifestation of his imagination magic. Because his power was constantly stolen all the time from his mom, it was then lent into his imagination that he was magicless. Thus, Asta's own magic makes him feel magicless. And nobody can sense Asta's imagination magic because it's like Gildre's, where he can make it so nobody else can sense it. It's funny because Asta lived magicless so long in a magic world, while his own imagination is what made him magicless. He manifested anti-magic because he wishes to destroy the current hierarchy of power in the Clover Kingdom that creates a lot of discrimination. That hierarchy is held up by the power of one's magic. So anti-magic is the perfect halt to that system. This actually explains a lot of these so-called inconsistencies in Black Clover, where anti-magic, which is supposed to destroy magic no matter how strong it is, doesn't. Asta is able to absorb magic into his anti-magic swords without immediately destroying that magic. That's because they are really magic, and that's what allows it to mesh with them. This also happens in the times where Asta struggles to destroy magic, like in some of these examples. I'll show them on screen. The reason why they aren't working is because the anti-magic is just secretly magic, and Asta just isn't strong enough to go against the magic. Just like any regular mage, if they're weaker than another mage, their magic is not going to destroy that other mage's magic. So this means that at some point, probably at the end of the fight with Lucius the Gratis, that Asta's true power will be revealed to all of us. That Asta has imagination magic, and that Yuno, and possibly other important people in his life, were merely creations. Who knows, maybe Julius and Lucius were created by Asta's imagination as well, and Black Clover is really just Asta's imagination twisting reality in a way that makes him the underdog hero. It would be wild if many of the atrocities we've seen in Black Clover were just Asta's imagination yearning to help people, and thus accidentally creating their need for help in the first place. There's one more thing. Remember, it wasn't just Tsukishima that Tabata used as inspiration to create Asta's character, but he used himself, much of his own life experiences to create Asta. What is Yuki Tabata to Black Clover? Guys, he's no different from Asta. It is Yuki Tabata's own imagination that spawns the entire concept and story of Black Clover. Do you remember the 5th time Asta's name was muttered in the story? They called him Tabasta. Now, most of us thought this was just some sort of nickname for Asta made by the others, but when you look at it like this, it's because Asta is a self-insert from Tabata, literally. If Asta is just a self-insert of Tabata, then he would absolutely need to have imagination magic. Tabata and Asta are working together to create the Black Clover narrative. So sorry, Yuno fans, he's not real. I'm only joking. Yuno was not real, but he's here now, and you can thank Tabasta for that. Anyways, I hope that all of you have a fantastic April. Sarak Makta felt the chill recede as she took another step. A couple more strides in the same direction, and she felt the frost all but escape her. She circled back to where she started, and froze once more. Spider legs tickled her spine, an invisible weight wrapping around her chest and taking her breath. She spotted an unusual shadow, a silhouette within the grass that stretched unnaturally. Its distorted visage even floated above the planted spire. The shadow formed in normalcy, like a child faking its slumber. The Timja knelt down and held her palm above the grass. The closer her hand dipped, the more the cold surged in her. "Come, little lightling," the ground whispered to her. She wasted no time, ripping her arm up and plunging the blade into the ground, muffling the whispers. Shadows exploded from the soil. A fountain of dark, living froth bubbled from the wound in the earth. Sarak Makta's blade screamed with light as she roared, the golden glow erasing the darkness. Vapors of magic trailed into the sky. "Shadow magic," she warned, as she stabbed her blade into the ground around her, revealing more of the shadowy masses. Surrounded by a pool of dark energy, she leaped into the air and flapped her wings, landing back into the light of her master's embrace. The Prior placed their backs to each other, forming a perimeter to begin ravishing the ground around them with the tips of their blades. The Timja looked up, only now noticing that the small patch of soil beneath their feet was the last bastion of the natural world around them. They were surrounded by an ocean of shadow, the horizon above ridden of its light. Don't touch it with anything but your bronder, Drar soon yelled as he dipped his weapon to the shadows. We should mesh now. The others nodded and followed their master's order, expanding their magical auras into a singular power source. Their combined might, far greater than the sum. Their stronghold of untainted land lengthened from the act. The Timja looked up to the sky as a last cause for hope. She sent a signal to her wings like it was connected tissue, but she felt no response from the attachment. The wings wouldn't even budge, let alone flap with enough force to produce flight. She looked at her master's much more extensive and robust appendages. They barely nudged as well. We can't fly out of here, can we? Said the apprentice. No, shook Sorgoth Belkor, but we can bet on Baldur's glare that will light our way to the port gate. He trailed his sword above his head, extending a light rope from the blade's edge. The golden string reached the sky above, whipping hard into the ground like a rancher to its livestock. The natural earth appeared beneath the whip. Waves of shadows scattered away, weaving a path of light that led towards safety. The Prior bolted for the trail's head. The Timja saw her master's legs smash into the ground like pistons, carrying them forward with a will she couldn't match. Her lungs struggled to gather enough air to pump her blood. Her sprint speed slowed, but the gap between her and the other knights were not widening. They're slowing down for me. I'm holding them back. Sarak Makta realized her one genuine fear. We're almost in the clearing, informed Drar soon. They all saw it, a portion of the wall within the dark dome with rays of light leaking inside of it. Hope instilled into the apprentice once more, and she accelerated. But ambitions were dashed as a black tornado spiraled above the ground in front of the exit. The cyclone stood over them like an elk bull, a long, boned arm stretched out of the cyclone, reaching for them. The twister slowed. The dark wind morphed into an inferno of shadows. An unseen force darted from the skeleton's palm, churning the knights into a grovel. Sarak Makta grunted as she felt the heftiness of her armor increase in mass. It became more challenging for her to even close her jaw, as if strands of wire from her teeth were mounted to a boulder. I've got you now. A flurry of whispers attacked from every direction. Hair spired atop their bumpy skin. Sarak Makta fought back against the force. Ah, a demon. No, her master's voice in unison. A Draugr. A second arm ripped through the mass of shadows. The black flame turned to embers, revealing the elegant, skeletal frame of the thing hunting them. The remaining magic floated around it in the shape of a toga, loosely clinging to it. The shadows undulated around the skeleton, occasionally revealing its barren ribcage. Inside of the bony brackets floated a beating heart, surrounded by blue flames. The force of each drum from the organs rattled the bones that encased it. The Draugr began walking towards the knights, leaving a trail of brown, dry grass behind. Bits of flesh sprung to life atop the bone frame. A red glow glared from its vacant eye sockets. The smell of death entered the air. It's absorbing the life energy from the plants, she thought. Sarak Makta averted her gaze from the grass and turned behind her. Their previous path was washed away from the shadow. Do not run. The Draugr whispered no more. Its voice was raspy like a smoker, but as deep as a bear. I've been itching for battle. Life tastes better when it's earned. The undead beast continued walking toward them, stealing the unconscious life beneath it. Patches of pale, rotten skin started to take shape around its face. A clouded eye initiated into the socket, but only enhanced the red glow. It reached for a jagged white mass hiding at its hip, a sword forged of bone. Rigid white pieces clung together. It wasn't a pretty blade like that of the Angel Guard's Bronder. Sarak Makta's arm was shaking, not from her fear, but the blade itself resonating with the weapon that stared across from it. She rubbed the flat of her weapon. It's going to be okay. She willed into its psyche. The Draugr lowered the tip of its undead sword and dragged it over the grass, leaving behind trails of barren soil. Ah, it let out a deep laugh. My blade. It's hungrier than me. Torrents of life energy pooled into the blade, instilling it with a power that turned the night's light into a flicker.